Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to What Keeps General Counsel Up at Night. My name is Patrick Fuller. I am joined today by Heather Nevitt, who is the editor-in-chief of Corporate Counsel magazine, and by Steve Kovalan, who is the director of research for ALM Intelligence. And so welcome, Heather. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Patrick.
Thank you.
And they are people of many words, as you can tell. So we want to get right in real quick to this, into some reflections of the current market. And, this is some data that I know some have seen in different areas throughout some of our publications recently. But it's really, I think, telling as to the state of the legal market. We have unpredictable revenue streams that are in a lot of volatility that are causing firms to really retool their approach to business development and client development. And what we're looking at here, which is interesting, is you see that huge drop in 2008 through 2009, and really the leveling off of it through the end of fiscal 2017. And we always point back to the financial crisis in 2008. But what I think a lot of people lose sight of through this is that it wasn't just the financial crisis. That was also when Susan Hackett was at ACC, and they started with Catherine Moynihan. They started the ACC Value Challenge. And that was also about the same time as well that you started seeing a lot of the e-billing companies who've been collecting data on matter cost and staffing and duration. All that data started coming back in a much more usable form to the legal departments, and you started to see much more educated buyers. We started having procurement coming into the picture. And all of that happened right around that same period, 2008, 2009, and of course it's just taken off from there. And I think it's caused a lot of issues now that you have a much more educated buyer. They have a better understanding of what matters cost, how long they should last. There's greater emphasis on lean skills and on project management. And of course, recently we have seen the ascent of technology and automation. And of course, there's also more choices for them as well. And, that is, again, causing issues in the market. And Heather, I think this slide here really looks towards I know a lot of what you're seeing as well too, right? Which is the growth of the number of lawyers that are in-house as well.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending the call. I'll just reiterate what I am hearing from in-house counsel, and that is, in fact, we are seeing that companies as a whole are tending to do more in-house, right, to help with costs. But it's not just about costs. When asked if it was just this factor, they usually say no. It's because they can. Larger departments have the expertise internally, so why not take on legal work they can do on their own? And they're doing that more often. I've even seen some that are setting up their legal departments like mid-sized firms. So they're doing practice area specific departments to handle like labor and employment or IP. So and also to this fact that's up on the screen. I mean, they have a lot of options at their disposal, right? So they can build and change up that department, and that the traditional idea of the legal department being that separate part of the company that's down the hall, that doesn't exist anymore. So they're part of the leadership, they're part of the innovation, they're part of the strategy of the company. And to that end, they're always looking for opportunities for not just cost savings, we talk about that a lot, but to increase efficiencies. So you can look to ASPs in that, or the big four coming into play. AI is another thing that they're looking towards for more routine legal needs. They're even talking about firm convergence. So I think this disruption kind of feels like doom and gloom for firms, but I did have a global GC tell me that although this disruption is happening in the market, it really doesn't diminish the need of outside firms for the bet the company type of legal work. They really need that. And for that, they're more likely to pay a premium, right? So they may cut back on the firms for the day-to-day contract stuff, for example, but still rely on outside firms for that complex legal work. And I really think I'll just sum this up quickly because I know we don't have a whole bunch of time for this call, but it'll come down to those, whether they're firms or ASPs, who can deliver the standardized services efficiently and effectively at a good cost, and then those who deliver specialized legal services that companies are unlikely to take on in-house. So again, those bet the company projects that require the more resources, they're able to do, that have the resources for them to be able to do for outside counsel, not internally.
You know, I think you bring up a really good point, by the way, too. Sorry, Steve. I think you bring up a really good point, Heather, just quickly, because it's not just about cost, right, about being the lowest cost. But the thing I always heard when I was working with legal departments was the words consistency and predictability. And, you know, for the bet the business stuff, there's a lot of that that's wildly unpredictable in terms of, you know, the budget to actual and matters going off the rails. But what really would drive a lot of the legal departments nuts was when fairly predictable matters would go off the rails. And there was really no consistency through there at all. Steve, you were going to say something. I apologize. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Given that we do have limited time, I'll move us forward by Patrick asking you could you go back a slide?
I could. Possibly. There we go.
There we are. I think it's important to highlight the role and the importance of volatility in today's market when it comes to law firms and their revenue growth, and that's something that has always existed, but post 2008, post the economic downturn, post the ACC value challenge and such, when we're seeing more wild swings when it comes to law firm revenue figures, and what was previously pre-2008, say a swing year to year, maybe from 15% growth to 5% growth. That swing was largely, you know, it at least stayed on the growth side of the ledger. Now, post 2008, you're seeing more and more firms that are swinging between sometimes great fast growth to no growth or shrinking revenue year over year, and that's if you see below the sort of pie chart there in the presentation, you can see some instances year to year of firms going from in 1 year. An AmLaw 200 firm going from 6% growth to minus 16%, or so on and so forth. And that's where, you know, for marketing and business development folks, being able to develop their relationships and to really smooth out some of that volatility by consistently developing business, consistently having a pipeline is all the more important.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too, because the other part on this that's I think germane is, you know, if you go back 20 years, you know, the number of firms that had year over year growth of less than 1% was literally just 1%. You know, the AmLaw 200, if you look at it in 2017, it was 33%. And, you know, the growth vector is not now what it was even 5 to 7 years ago as well. And I think that gets into the other part here, which is the firms have increased dramatically in size, right? There's greater competition. They're also much more spread out as well. And, you know, we know, and we won't get into it because of limited time here, but we know that there's also, you know, Steve, I think, because you write about this a lot, about 5% on average of partners in the AmLaw 200 are making lateral moves from year to year as well. So not only do we have a revenue volatility, we also have a talent volatility as well. And for the marketing and BD professionals, the business professionals inside the firm, you know, they are also being asked to do more with less, because one of the byproducts of 2008, 2009 is firms were concerned about keeping that margin. So as clients pushed down on price, as Heather was talking about, you know, firms started trimming costs in other areas. And in a lot of cases, it came down to staffing and business professionals. And now, you know, we are seeing teams that have fewer marketing business development professionals who have exploded in firm size with the number of lawyers and the headcount, but they've stayed the same or not grown appropriately or accordingly with their staff size. And that's putting much more pressure on the staff to be able to produce, I think, tangible results, which gets into what we're going to talk about today. So, Steve, you've done a lot of work researching and leading the GC Up at Night research. And so from the previous iterations of this, can you kind of walk us through some of what the findings were?
Sure, and so that's right. ALM Intelligence previously fielded a survey of in-house leaders, particularly focus on GCs, asking them across 5 kind of broad practice areas that we see on the screen now. What is it that's most important? What are the things that are keeping you up at night? What are your key challenges day to day? And what's important for I think those on this call to understand is when you see the results such as this is how you talk to your client. This is how you pitch to your client. This is how you win business by showing how you or positioning your firm, your attorneys, how they meet these needs and help these concerns. Now you can see, maybe not entirely surprisingly, that the regulations enforcement top the list here, but then you see also a couple sort of emerging areas of the GC's kind of role and function with privacy and data security, and then the risk and crisis management. While risk has certainly always been part of the GC portfolio, but the GC as crisis manager has really started to take shape, and understanding that the GC's role and the in-house role in leading companies through corporate crises is more important than ever. So for firms looking to win business, understanding that these are some of the top concerns should help them shape their pitches and develop what should be their competitive advantage. And so even within, I'm sorry, go ahead, Heather.
Oh, I just wanted to pipe in real quickly about the reputational risk. I mean, if they don't have enough to worry about, it's now part of their responsibility, right? That the company's reputation. And Steve points out it's one issue that's increasingly keeping them up at night. I think this will grow. I foresee this every time I talk to a GC. This is on the top of their minds. The exposure to crises is amplified, and then the need to react with urgency is paramount. So without a plan in place and these negative headlines hit in social media, that brush fire could easily develop into an out-of-control forest fire. And we see that specifically with all these CEOs dropping like flies over sexual misconduct allegations. They now have to plan for that too. And so, in fact, in a recent discussion I had with a global GC, I asked him what were his top 3 challenges keeps him up at night. And his answer was, first and foremost, the Me Too movement and its impact. And for context, his role was also extended to HR. He was head of HR, so it was particularly important to him, but also as a business leader. So, and he rattled off, he really rattled off the statistic that 144 CEOs have been fired so far for their behavior since Me Too. So that, I just wanted to point that out, that risk has always been there, but that crisis management and reputational risk of the company is just really important to them.
And that's where Heather is if and when those crises strike, is more and more you're seeing the GC out front as spokesperson for the organization. I mean, nothing more striking than was it? I think in 2017 or so, when sort of the various social media providers, Facebook, Twitter, etc., were called before Congress as part of an investigation and looking into Russia's influence on the 2016 presidential election. Many of those testifying are being brought before Congress, having to answer for the policies and sort of reputations for their companies were the GCs.
Right, which is new, relatively new in their wheelhouse.
So, Steve, moving over to both IP and regulatory, we kind of looked at the broader set there, but as you get into each of these within IP and really the concerns there, and also with regulatory, what were your findings?
And so one thing that's interesting about our study is on the one hand, we were able to deal with some of these 5 practice areas that we chose independently, but we also recognize that the practice areas are quite interrelated. And you can really see it here when it comes to the IP concerns and then regulatory and enforcement concerns overall, where on the one hand, you see it when it comes to IP, enforcing IP rights is something that was brought up and is as something that's a major challenge for GCs. And with the value of IP, many companies now have IP as their most valuable assets. And in a global marketplace, what you're seeing is that crossing jurisdictions, say from Europe to Asia to North America and South America, understanding how you enforce IP rights, the rules and regulations and mechanisms for defending those rights and asserting those rights change. And so that ties right over to a concern just broadly across regulations and enforcement, where firms were saying, they're really struggling with dealing with this cross-jurisdictional variability. So, we're in an increasingly regulated world. We're in an increasingly global marketplace. That means that GCs have more and more regulations and rules and laws to keep track of. And to the firms that can demonstrate that they have the capability to help GCs manage that ever-changing regulatory environment really have a leg up on the competition.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting as well too. As your research led to the amount of substantial time that to further your point on the regulatory side, that is what is literally dominating their most precious resource right now, which is time, is the regulatory. And to the point that Heather made previously as well too. And by the way, we should point out that this was conducted really before the Me Too movement, for lack of a better term, really kind of exploded. Right, this research was conducted right before things started happening there. So the risk and crisis management aspect might now be even higher now than it was then as well too. Correct?
I would certainly say so, and again, add in just when it comes to regs and enforcement that as we've also had a volatile political environment, you're seeing huge swings from the way just what laws and regulations are passed, and then even how existing regulations and rules are enforced. So even more now, keeping up with that regulatory uncertainty, as you can see, is certainly a full-time job for the GC and in-house attorneys.
So you mentioned, as we talked before about the substantial time aspect of it compared to very important, and the tension. I found this actually pretty fascinating, looking at that from the time to importance perspective. particularly in a couple of instances, right? One, especially with data security and privacy, is exceedingly important. Not nearly as much time being spent on it as well. And Heather, from your conversations as well, you're running into this, and you're hearing this more often than not now, correct?
Yes, and especially after GDPR came into play. And then as more companies are doing business overseas, they have to know how to successfully manage those challenges that come with global legal department and dealing with the GDPR. And I think one of the things is they're looking at it on a larger scale. So we have the European companies that are doing it pretty well. They kind of know how to do it, but the U.S. companies are still falling behind, and they still haven't caught up. And the messaging has just been keep at it. But I think that's a huge challenge, and I know this survey was put out before GDPR hit, I think. But they're still struggling with that challenge.
Heather, that's correct. The survey was out before GDPR hit, but it had been passed. It was just looming and had not yet taken effect. But I think what these really demonstrated is something we were talking about, Heather, you and Patrick and I earlier. These numbers, the figures here, really represent the having to do more with less, or how I often describe it is at the very least, legal departments having to do more with not enough. And the old saying that there's just not enough hours in the day. You see how some of these issues are rated in terms of importance, but then you're seeing how that there's not a commensurate amount of time dedicated to them based on how important they are to the organization. And here we see we saw some on the previous slide, and then in this one we see just what those differences are in terms of how important each issue was viewed, and the difference in how much time the department was able to dedicate to that issue. And it just really creates a resource crunch for the legal department. And law firms, alternative providers, anyone that can step in and help GCs solve that resource crunch, you have a leg up on the competition.
Yeah, and speaking of which, and Steve, you just mentioned the alternative service providers as well too. And when we were asking, these questions, and we went through this survey, one of the things that we were looking at was who's handling the work, and the average percentage of all the company legal work completed by a specific source. And Heather, to your comments earlier, as we looked at the ramp up of in-house legal departments, I was somewhat surprised, even having worked with a lot of legal departments who insource a lot of work and have been ramping up their use of technology, to see that 71% of the respondents indicated that they're keeping this work in-house. And I think that's kind of a stunning figure, which really I think illustrates just how tight the competition is now for law firms in the market.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's right.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead, Heather.
No, I'll just reiterate what I said. I think they're really looking at the fact that they can do a lot of this work, and that they're trying to. We had a story that Avis, cut their legal departments from like 400 to 7. It's a reality. The firm convergence thing is a reality, but I think that the more they do in-house, the more they realize what they need from outside counsel. And I don't think that it's just necessarily, it's basically shifting the work. What work have they decided that outside counsel, they can just pay a premium for because they need that expertise and specialization, and then internally they can handle maybe the more day-to-day contract and day-to-day work.
And I guess that's the thing is for those law firms, those ASPs that are trying to win this work from in-house legal departments that this is what they've got to understand, first and foremost, some of these challenges that were described earlier. And then once you understand those challenges, you have to convince the in-house department to outsource that work. You need to demonstrate why it would be better for the in-house legal department to give you the work rather than to do it themselves. And if you can't, adequately explain why that is, then the work will just be kept in-house. And so that needs to be part of the thought process and the pitch when talking to in-house leaders. The pitch has to be more than just, we're really smart, we're a law firm, we do legal work, give us your business. The in-house legal department has really smart people. They have lawyers that do this kind of thing. Why should they outsource it to you, a third-party provider, whether it's a law firm or the Big Four, or an alternative legal provider that's more tech-focused? That's really the key question.
Or if I should hire a data privacy officer, or I should hire a firm to handle my data privacy issues. Yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes back to what we're actually, talking about today, which is how do we underscore, one of the things that we heard consistently in a lot of, Heather, you've done a number of GC panels. Steve, you've done them as well. I've done them over the years. And recently, more than in years past, I've heard, we've always heard, you need to know my firm and my business. We're getting increasing feedback as, no, you also have to know my industry. You've got to be immersed in my industry. And we've seen that, going back 5-6 years. I remember working with firms when I was consulting, going into and getting rid of the traditional practice group structure and going much more to industry teams, right? So we could really concentrate and present our knowledge and hone our expertise in a very particular industry. And I think that's part of what the feedback was from this was, the focus on practice groups was great, but what we really want to be able to understand is how well do these firms know our business and our industry? How can, are they going to be partners with us? Because we get that they might be great IP attorneys or great regulatory attorneys, but collectively, how well do they understand my business and the industry and the issues that I'm going to face? And that's, when we put together this program, Steve, this is really where it came down to was, how can we do this research that you and your team lead and do the analysis on this to be able to help the firms present themselves as experts in a particular industry and vertical as a way of underscoring, what they bring to the table. And I think this is something that we could spend just a few minutes kind of talking on just quickly here as we wrap this up, is what the Up at Night program is, right? So, if you walk through this slide here, which we still have slide title on, because that's what it is let's understand what is it that we're doing from cradle to grave within this, starting with questionnaire development.
And so what we're doing is we're working with our study partners to identify the kinds of questions and such that can really help position them as first thought leaders, but also help them best understand their clients. And we're bringing that together with sort of a set of stock questions that allow us to compare results year over year. But it's very much a partnership in developing a questionnaire that really can speak to, in this case, as we've moved to more of an industry focus, what are the key issues in a particular industry. And that often crosses, as you think of the industry as a vertical, crosses numerous practice areas. So it's, if you're in the manufacturing industry, for example, there are issues of regulation and enforcement, corporate governance, issues of IP, issues of labor and employment. And so really, it really also sets up that ability for the law firm to cross sell, right? The holy grail of legal BD are the synergies that are supposed to take place when practice areas start talking to each other and cross-selling. And one way to do that is by organizing and focusing on these industries and really going into clients with a holistic focus of what the firm can offer to a particular industry client.
Yeah. So as we go through this program, as we do the work and the deliverables go to the law firm, part of that, as you can see here, were a number of infographics. We find that not only underscoring the expertise through reports is valuable, but also the ability to create visual components to this, again, to reach buyers of legal services and influencers in different ways, but also then the media exposure too. And Heather, this is something I know you and I have talked quite a bit about the ability to, when we write these reports, for example, to hold that internal press conference, to be able to line up the ALM editors and reporters and give them copies of the research and the reports that the firms have helped co-author with us, and be able to have the reporters ask questions of the lawyers, in case there's an opportunity for additional stories to be crafted, correct?
Yes, I think that would be amazing. I mean, it just adds to the coverage.
Correct. So as we wrap this up here, a couple of things. Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. So we write on from the ALM intelligence side, write and talk and speak and produce collateral on these issues. And very often what we're doing is newsworthy, and that's where you see it picked up by the various ALM legal publications, whether it be Corporate Counsel magazine, the Texas Lawyer, the American Lawyer, National Law Journal, etc.
Yeah, this data is very valuable and very helpful to our coverage to get it out to our readers and can help them do their job.
Well, and we've used it, I think, a couple of times this year already in various ways. We've used infographics, and we've run those in data snapshots that have gone out. And so the firms that we've worked with previously are continuing to get, coverage in those areas. There's attribution to them from that study. And I think that type of residual benefit is compelling. We're up against time, so there are a few things that are still that we still have availability for going into 2019. So consumer products, technology, communication, entertainment, transportation. I'm somewhat surprised, along with retail and food, beverage, and tobacco. Insurance was just taken, as a matter of fact, so we'll be taking that one off the list. But there are a number of industries that are still available, and this is an intensive research project, so we have limited this to 12 very broad industries. We know that we could go much further in, but I do think that what's interesting through this is with the level of deliverables that come in, from the reports to the distribution network through American Lawyer and beyond, the infographics. There is a significant amount of opportunity to really help a firm showcase their expertise in given industry. Steve, Heather, I know we're up against time. Are there any final comments?
Well, I think it's a great program. It always has delivered on some really cool insights. There's some neat, and you can see a lot of collateral that's produced through this, and it really can show off for a law firm how they are a thought leader and can help a law firm internalize and better understand their client base. All while really doing some neat and just cool research.
I will echo that and appreciate you all listening and that there's some really interesting data in here, and it's always led to some really great stories for us at Corporate Counsel.
Yeah, so if anybody's interested, Rob Alston, our Senior Director of Sales, we can forward this information on. You guys can contact Rob through there. Here's another overview of what is actually involved in this. We are up against time. We appreciate Steve and Heather coming on. As you guys can imagine, we could probably talk for hours about what they've uncovered through, Heather through her work with corporate counsel and Texas Lawyer, and the amount of conversations that she has and the quality of those conversations, and Steve through his research. Both of them are also JDs, and they as well. So I am the non-lawyer on the call today, and they are engaging in conversations and research that is exceedingly valuable for the reader and for the firms that we're doing work with. So we appreciate their time. We look forward to talking with everybody soon. If there are questions, please reach out to any of us or to Rob Alston, and we look forward to talking to everybody soon. Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah.